What's up gamers, Dreamcastguy here, talking today about Resident Evil, because it looks like over the course of the last 24 hours, we've seen a bunch of leaks and rumors that are beginning to confirm that we're going to be getting a Resident Evil 3 remake. But not only is this cool, it looks like we could be getting it very, very soon, perhaps even in the next 6 months. This is a massive update, and something that to me is something that's probably going to completely shake up 2020. Now, for a variety of reasons that I definitely want to get into, but let's just get into the obvious one first. Resident Evil is still one of the best horror franchises of all time. I am personally very much obsessed with it. Not only do I actually play all the games again and again, I own every single version of every single one of the games, multiple copies. In fact, I am such a redhead, like when it comes to Resident Evil fanatics, I'm losing my mind just excited. I have all the strategy guides in pristine condition just so I can look through it and actually enjoy all the maps. That is why, personally, I was so freaking in love with what they decided to do with the Resident Evil 2 remake this year. It was definitely bigger and better, and of course had a very, very nice coat of paint making it shinier, but the thing that really made this game fascinating and kind of addictive to play through again and again is because it is a completely new game. Yes, it exists in a current framework, and yes, it is obviously a remake in that it tells the same story, but this is fundamentally a completely new game altogether. As soon as you turn it on, it's difficult not to be impressed by the fact that they did such a brick-for-brick recreation of Raccoon City that's just so gorgeous and gory and gooey all at the same time, and I absolutely love that. But in my opinion, there is going to be a huge freaking shakeup when it comes to 2020 and everybody sees Resident Evil 3 Remake. The biggest reason being that, obviously, Resident Evil 3 is a very, very different game. If you loved Resident Evil 2 or thought that it was a little bit too difficult, well, I got some good news and I got some bad news. Resident Evil 3 is a lot harder, mostly because it actually liked to try and trick you. Basically, as you're playing through Resident Evil 3, what it would like to do is it actually had branching paths. Occasionally there'd be a thing where like a boss is walking directly at you and you'd have a decision to try and knock him off a cliff or just directly fight back. There was times where you would have multiple puzzle pieces and you could try and solve things in a different order, like the clock puzzle or going over to a different area like investigating the journalism office. And depending on what order you chose to do things could move around monsters. You could have crows busting through a window or different random jump scares. And it made it where as you were playing Resident Evil 3, even though this is just obviously an old 90s shock freaking horror fest, it would really kind of keep you trembling playthrough after playthrough because you could not possibly predict what was coming next. It would constantly scare you because you couldn't tell the limits of the coding. But the biggest thing is that if you had some trouble with Mr. X in the Resident Evil 2 remake, he was obviously a giant guy who liked to just stalk you relentlessly. No matter how many times you shot him in the brains or hit him with a rocket launcher, this dude would always get back up. Well, guess what? Mr. X basically has a big brother, somebody by the name of Nemesis. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was originally going to be a spin-off. The idea behind it was that it was going to be a side story that takes place inside of Raccoon City. As the events of Resident Evil 2 are taking place, 3 was sort of just tucked in underneath. And so they wanted to try and take the idea of a big shambling monster that never stops and crank it up to 1,000,000. Nemesis is way, way more terrifying because he actively pursues you. Whenever you're playing the game, a lot of times you'll actually notice some sorts of crashes or bangs or stuff like that. It was Nemesis. This dude would literally be stalking you throughout the entire game, and as soon as you just sort of let your guard down or think you might be able to be calm, bam, he would show up and wreck you hella. Now the biggest thing is, I loved Nemesis a lot because he actually had a series of instant kills. As he got more tentacles and does more of his evolutions, he could pick you up and instantly spear you through the brain. And I like this because it made it where you were just afraid to even be near this guy. It wasn't about dodges, it wasn't about having enough ammunition. If you made a single tactical mistake while just trying to outrun the guy, guess what? You were going to get a mega gory game over. I am so curious to see how they handle that in the remake. I mean, obviously they're going to try and make him smarter, they're definitely going to make him a bigger, brawnier badass, but more than that, this is just going to be exciting because I want to see how people freak out about it. I want to see all the compilations of people being murdered over and over again by such a giant titan. I am so freaking hyped. I'm sorry I'm like yelling. This is some of the best news I have ever freaking heard, but the thing that's so curious to me is because I'm somebody who actually played each of the Resident Evils as they came out, one by one. I sort of got into the series right after the original one came out, and what's funny is that I remember back when Resident Evil 3 was actually hated. There were a bunch of rumors in the 90s where people were talking about Capcom and the deals they were signing to try and get funding, and one of the things that apparently they did is they talked to Sony, and Sony at the time said, okay, we have the PlayStation 1, the PlayStation 1 is really popular, we want you to make 3 Resident Evil games for it. So obviously they made Resident Evil, they made Resident Evil 2, and then they started trying to come up with the earliest ideas for a definite new game, and it ended up being a thing where they had to make a third project on the PlayStation, which was Nemesis. Nemesis was just going to be a tiny little spin-off, and it ended up being this big, grand experience instead. But a lot of people, for some reason, at the time, in the late 90s, a lot of people were like, oh, Resident Evil 3 isn't a real Resident Evil. Instead, everybody was talking about the upcoming, at the time, Resident Evil Code Veronica. This is technically the real Resident Evil 3, but I still love Nemesis because, honestly, I feel like it's the game that first started to try and experiment with the idea of pure gleeful killing. You may not know this if you didn't play it at the time, but Resident Evil 3 invented the Mercenaries mode. If you're somebody who played a bunch of hours of it in Resident Evil 4, it didn't begin there. It actually started all the way back on the PlayStation. After you finished the game, you could play through a series of campaigns where you had to try and rush through the entire city, and basically the rules were every time you killed a zombie, it added on time, and basically as soon as the clock ran out, you would explode. So it made it where you were trying to rush from one end of the city to the other to try and get the bomb disarmed, but simultaneously, you couldn't just duck and dodge. You had to fight. You had to actually kind of take those small breaths of enjoyment from getting a good headshot or using one of your limited rocket launcher shots to try and blow up the tyrants. It's basically impossible to overhype just how good the Resident Evil 3 remake is most likely going to be. And the fact that it's probably going to be coming out in the early parts of 2020 is the best part of all. And I think that this could be a very, very smart move by Capcom. So something we've seen from a couple publishers, especially over the course of the last generations, is you come out with one last incredibly massive project right before the next console generation. Basically as a last explosive hurrah. This is when the most people are going to own a console. So if they decide to drop this on the Xbox One and the PlayStation and of course Steam right before the next generation begins, you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of millions of people that are potential customers. And the biggest thing to me is everybody's going to pick it up. Capcom, I have to just say, what a smart business move. You treated the Resident Evil 2 remake with a massive amount of respect. You understood what made it special, you understand what made the zombies so terrifying in the first place, and you managed to update that so completely. So I have full confidence that, as weird as it is, the Resident Evil 2 remake is probably going to win Game of the Year in 2019, and the Resident Evil 3 remake is a strong contender already for the 2020 Game of the Year. That is, unless Cyberpunk 2020 is the craziest thing ever or Doom Eternal. I am excited for what's coming next, and really, I am just hoping to see it. There are some rumblings and some speculation that we could see it at the Game Awards here in just a couple weeks, and I am just so on board and so prepared to see that gameplay. Show me the action, show me the explosions, show me why Resident Evil is finally great again. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this freaking hyped up rant, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. Oh my gosh, I'm not sure. Let me think about it. I may try and do a stream of some Resident Evil soon here on the YouTube channel, just because I do love playing Resident Evil, and honestly, I like speed running them, so maybe what I'll do is like a 56-minute playthrough of one of the Resident Evils. Let me know if you guys like that. If this gets like a couple thousand likes or something, I'll do it, alright? Love you guys! Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.